And with that,
You don't like
to get going, thank you all for being here. And of course, thank you to Elle for being our provider this semester. We really, really appreciate it. The students obviously have done a lot of work, and I know you're anxious to hear what they have to say.
I am.
You know, I've told this story so many times, I can't remember how long we've been doing this program, but it really was generated by an interest by the students, not really by that time the Institute or the center to have this research program. But it can't take place without the providers, and we really appreciate your time and effort. We know how busy you are traveling the world and dealing with I don't know how many different issues. So on behalf of the center and the Institute, just want to thank you for your time and your energy. It really makes the difference in the quality experience that the students have. So thank you
I'm
so much.
excited to hear from you, and I'm excited to see where we can take that research.
Great. Good, good, good. So the students will do their presentation, and then we'll turn it over for Q&A. We certainly encourage everyone to ask questions, but we always defer to our provider initially anyway to start the questioning off, and then we'll go from there. So no further ado, immigration reform.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joshua.
I'm Shwetha.
I'm Matthew.
I'm Jamie.
I'm Maverick.
I'm Lauren.
And today, our group will be presenting on formulating 21st century U.S. immigration policy reform. Before we start, we'd all like to extend a big thank you to Elle for allowing us to be part of this project and for allowing us to understand more about U.S. immigration policy and its consequences, not only for our country, but for the entire world. So to start is our research question, which is basically, how can we use the cross-sections of historical immigration legislation and the immigration platforms of the leading Democratic candidates in the 2020 presidential election to be able to formulate practical immigration policy reform that will confront 21st century challenges? Our presentation will be broken into 3 different parts. We'll start with a historical overview of important immigration-related legislation from the 1940s until the present day. Our second part will be a discussion about the immigration policies or immigration platforms of the leading 2020 Democratic presidential candidates. And we'll finish our presentation by presenting our own personal policy proposals on how we think we could best solve U.S. immigration policy today. Starting with the Bracero Program. The Bracero Program was a program initiated under the FDR administration, the Roosevelt administration, from 1942 to 1964. This program was actually a series of 3 bilateral agreements between the U.S. and Mexican governments that in total saw around 4.5 to 5 million legal temporary workers enter the United States to work in places such as agriculture, mining, and the railroad industry. Under the Bracero Program, these workers had rights, such as the right to minimum wage, the right to transportation, the right to adequate housing, and protection from discrimination and maltreatment. The program as a whole was seen as both a success and a failure. A success in that 4.5 to 5 billion temporary legal workers entered the United States at a time of severe manpower shortage due to World War II. It was also seen as a failure because of all the rights that were guaranteed within these Bracero programs. The United States government did not actively enforce these protections for Braceros, leading to many instances of discrimination from U.S. native-born employers towards these Bracero workers. Moving on to the Immigration and Nationality Act in 1965, better known as the INA, this piece of legislation was passed under the Johnson administration, and it was huge in terms that, first, it abolished the discriminatory national origins quota system and replaced that system with a family-based reunification system. Also, this piece of legislation led to hemisphere caps of 170,000 per year from the Eastern Hemisphere, with caps with a maximum of 20,000 per country, and for the first time ever, a Western Hemisphere cap placed initially at 120,000 with no per country cap. As you can see by these 2 graphs right here, this led to a huge demographic shift in the fabric of America. This graph on the left right here shows the foreign-born U.S. population from 1960 to 2000. 1960s in blue, red is 2000. You can see a huge decrease in this first one right here, which is people from Europe and Canada, but huge rises in people from Latin America, the second one right here, and especially huge in Asia, which started from 13% and jumped all the way to 30% in 40 years. And this story is also backed up by this graph right here. You can see over time a decrease in the green, which is decrease in people from Europe, an increase in yellow, people from Asia, and an increase in blue, people from Latin America and the rest of the Americas in whole. Now, leading on to IRCA 1986. One of the big reasons for the need for IRCA, or the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 was twofold. One, with the end of the Bracero Program in 1964, you saw a complete shutdown of the legal way of temporary workers to enter the United States. In addition, with the first ever Western Hemisphere immigration cap of 120,000, that severely limited the number of legal workers that could enter the United States, cheap foreign labor, AKA people coming from Latin America and Mexico. Because of that, that led to a huge increase in illegal immigration as U.S. employers tried to build a backdoor to get cheap labor into the United States. And that was the main reason for IRCA 20 years later. The goal of IRCA is seen through what many people refer to as the three-legged stool. The first leg to the stool is tougher border and immigration enforcement, seen through criminal penalties for the fraudulent use of IDs and by giving more money to both INS and the EOIR. The second leg to the stool is penalties for employers hiring illegal workers. This is seen through both criminal and civil penalties, monetary fines, and in the worst circumstances, prison sentences for employers who do this over and over again. And finally, we have the legalization program, the third leg to this stool. This legalization program is actually split into two different parts. The first was considered a general amnesty program. To be able to be considered for that program, you had to prove continuous residency in the United States since the 1st of January 1982. And the second part of this program is called the SAW program, or the Special Agricultural Workers Program. To be eligible for this program, you had to prove at least 90 days of agricultural work in the U.S. from May of 1985 to May of 1986. However, many people have questioned the effectiveness of IRCA over the years, which is seen in this blue chart right here. The first leg to this stool, tougher border and immigration enforcement, is generally seen as a success. In fiscal year 1986, we had 3,600 border agents and dedicated $575 million to immigration. In fiscal year 2011, we had 20,700 border agents and dedicated $17.2 billion to immigration, so huge rises in both of those figures. The second leg of our stool, penalties for employers hiring illegal immigrants, was seen as a complete failure, and this is the reason, and there's two reasons for that. One, within the IRCA legislation, it only says that that potential employees have to provide identification documents that appear genuine. There's no need for the employer to verify the authenticity of these documents, which is usually seen through Social Security cards and green cards. The second reason for this is the complete non-enforcement on the part of the U.S. federal government for their employer sanctions. For example, not making an employee verification program such as E-Verify mandatory for all U.S. employers, just allowing employers to opt into the program if they like to. And finally is the legalization program. This program is seen as both a success and a failure. It was successful in the sense that 1.6 million people were legalized under the General Amnesty Program, and 1.1 million people were legalized under the Special Agricultural Workers Program. These people were eventually able to get permanent legal status and eventual U.S. citizenship. However, it could be seen as a failure because it really did not stop the problem of illegal immigration, due to the fact that many illegal immigrants arriving after 1986 in IRCA thought that the U.S. might pass another amnesty bill similar to what we see here. Due to that, the problem for illegal immigration really did not stop, which led to the need for 25 years later a policy such as DACA to be passed.
Because IRCA didn't do a great job of addressing comprehensive immigration reform, we needed a way to allow the children of these immigrants to be able to function in our society and be able to use our institutions without having fear of being deported. And that's what DACA tries to do. DACA is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it is a program, it's a non-congressionally approved administrative program that allows certain individuals who meet a criteria, who came to the US as individuals and are in school here and are working here, to be able to apply for deferred action for up to 2 years and be granted work authorization. Now, what's the criteria to qualify for DACA? You have to come to the US before your 16th birthday, be under the age of 31, continuously reside in the US since June 15th, 2007, as well as be in school or have graduated from high school, obtained a GED, or honorably discharged from the US military. You are considered ineligible if you have committed a felony or a major misdemeanor, but you can commit up to 2 minor misdemeanors and still qualify for DACA benefits. Now, what are the benefits of DACA as a whole? Well, you are able to reside in the US and have work permits, which allows you to have health insurance through your employer, as well as fund any higher education initiatives that you would like. And in many states, you're able to get a driver's license, which forms a legal form of identification. And the Obama administration chose to deploy DACA as an executive order despite the fact that Congress had repeatedly denied such programs through the normal legislative process. One such piece of legislation that has been debated a lot since 2001 is the DREAM Act, which is the Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors Act, which grants legal status for juveniles who came to the US and are working here currently. However, this has been debated in Congress for decades now, and it's still not going to be passed. Is DACA effective? In many ways, yes it is. It certainly takes steps to achieve what it intends to by allowing these immigrants to work and provide a life for themselves and gain self-respect. It allows them to pursue the upward mobility that their parents came to the US for, and they make a significant part of our economy, so it's important for them to be able to work here in a legal manner. However, at the same time, DACA fails to recognize many other factors. Over the years, undocumented workers have contributed up to $300 billion, which is about 20% of the $3.7 trillion Social Security fund. But they only take out $1 billion, which is 0.037% of the Social Security Trust Fund, because many of them are considered ineligible. There's also no concrete path to citizenship, so their status in the US is still in jeopardy and they can still be deported by ICE. In addition, there's unreasonable application fees and education requirements, as well as language and cultural barriers that make it inaccessible as well. But the most important part of DACA is a work authorization, because not only does it benefit the immigrants, but it also benefits the US economy. If we are able to grant work authorization to many more undocumented workers, the effects on our US economy would be insurmountable. Unfortunately, DACA took a downward spiral once Trump announced his candidacy for the US presidency. Secretary of the Homeland Security, Elaine Duke, rescinded the 2012 DACA memo and announced an immediate wind down of the program. Effective immediately, no new apps were being accepted. All those who had benefits expiring by March 5th, 2018 were able to renew their applications, but all the beneficiaries whose benefits expired after March 6th were not allowed to renew their applications and were not able to apply for work authorization. Now, the economic implications of terminating DACA are grave. In a special report by the Greensburg Center for Geoeconomic Studies with the Council on Foreign Relations, Gordon Hansen concluded that the stemming illegal immigration from this would likely lead to a net drain to the US economy, which is a finding that calls into question the increase in border protection. The current guest worker programs that are being debated in Congress fail to recognize the economic incentives that drive illegal immigration, which include the workers' desire to work in the US as well as the employer's desire for low-cost, flexible labor. The recent developments include the Supreme Court hearings about providing adequate explanation for the end of DACA. So the plaintiffs include Trump versus the NAACP, like Elle versus Vidal, as well as the Department of Homeland Security versus the Regents of the University of California. So the plaintiffs in this case argue before the Supreme Court of the United States that the phase out of DACA violates the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a federal law that governs how agencies execute and establish regulations. So despite the fact that the court currently leans right ideologically, Justices Kagan, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Ginsburg pushed the government hard, arguing that the phase-out did violate the law because they failed to recognize how many people, organizations, and educational institutions would be affected by such an abrupt decision. So going into the 2020 Democratic primaries, it's important for these candidates to address how to go forward with not only DACA, but broader immigration reform. So in the next few slides, we're going to be going over the major Democratic candidates and how they're going to be addressing these problems.
with immigration policies affecting who goes to choose for the 2020 election, we now move on to the 2020 presidential candidates. We first discussing the policies of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who has recently dropped out, and then Elizabeth Warren and Julian Castro. We chose the first three of the candidates because of their leading, because of the led in the polls, and Julian Castro had a clear and detailed immigration policies. The order that we chose is we start with more modern immigration policies like Biden. As the quote says, nothing would fundamentally change. Biden essentially wants to return back to an Obama-era style immigration policies. This is his third time running, and we'll see that, and we've seen that he's been a senator and a vice president. Before I begin his policies, I want to talk about what he supported as both a senator and a vice president to better understand his relatively moderate policies. His background as a senator is that he's expressed support in the 1986 RCA, the 2006 Comprehensive Immigration Reform Act, and the 2006 Secure Fence Act. Essentially, Biden has expressed support in providing amnesty to undocumented immigrants, as well as pathways to citizenship and increasing funding for the border and stronger security. Despite the 2006 Secure Fence Act, which was provided 700 fencing borders, he has since expressed regret. In 2007, he says that we do not need to provide a 700-mile fence, but instead we need to provide means by which we allow earned citizenship. Likewise, when Biden was a vice president, he supported integrating economic and immigration policies under the 2013 Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act. This bill, which would have provided citizenship to undocumented immigrants, would have used their labors to ensure that the U.S. retains its global status economically. And as a former senator, Biden was able to reach across party aisles and talk to Republican senators to pass the bill. However, the bill did pass. The bill did fail in the House. As Vice President, Biden's also supported protecting undocumented immigrants and youth through the executive orders of DACA and legislation in the DREAM Act, because he claims that 11 million people live in the shadow, and that I believe, in his quote, they're already citizens. Since these undocumented immigrants, youth are already Americans to Biden says that it's very crucial to pass reform that has pathways to citizenship. However, as vice presidency and senator, and even to this day, Biden still does not support establishing English as the U.S.'s official language. He claims that such policies would deter and actually discriminate against immigrants who don't know English. Furthermore, Biden does support DACA, but prefers not to use the use of executive orders because these orders are unstable, and presidents, as we're seeing now, can reverse them. And lastly, he has expressed no support in decriminalizing the border because, in his quote, that increasing the number of undocumented immigrants coming into our country our economy cannot afford it. Essentially, Biden's immigration proposals can be broken up into 4 sections. The first of our 4 sections is strengthening border security. Biden essentially wants to increase funding to have better screening processes and border technologies such as thermal technologies to track individuals crossing through the use of coyotes. In parallel to his comments about the 2006 Secure Fence Act, Biden has stated that Trump's wall is a disgrace to American values and an assault to Latin voters. As a result, he doesn't support an actual physical barrier, but rather supports focusing on technologies that would reduce drug trafficking and especially mitigate the opium crisis. Biden is more than happy to make contracts with private corporations to ensure that such technologies can occur, but nonetheless, he does vow to militarize the border at entry points if necessary. His second proposal is criminalizing illegal immigration crossing. At the end of the day, and I quote, people have to get in line, that's the problem. Because of Biden's belief that people aren't getting in line, Biden wants to continue to criminalize illegal crossings unless there are legitimate claims about asylums. And Biden does recognize that the asylum process is broken and offers to flood the asylum process with more judges to accept legitimate claims and to have quicker decisions. But other than that, Biden would like to keep current statute. His third proposal is foreign aid. Particularly if you'd like to spend $750 million to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. By doing so, Biden claims that this would surely mitigate the amount of people crossing illegally because Biden would like to fix the, quote, brokenness and chaos in their own country. Biden has also expressed greater support and stronger diplomacy with these countries to fuel our economy. Biden has referenced that immigrants are replacement workers, and because of the U.S. having an influx of a surge of replacement workers who replace aging workers, Biden has said that this is the reason why the U.S. has had such strong economic growth. Biden wants to continue this constant flow of immigrants replacing American aging workers to ensure that we have a strong economy. And Biden would like to use their works to provide a pathway to citizenship. And his last proposal is a pathway to citizenship in which he wants Congress to prioritize the passing of the DREAM Act. And he wants to keep and expand. The amount of recipients, youth recipients. Biden has claimed that undocumented immigrants are already American, and because most are productive members of society, in his opinion, they need to just come out of the shadow. So therefore, Biden would like the two requirements in becoming a citizenship to have no criminal record and to be employed. Biden has expressed strong support in providing driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants because it would help them, because it would allow them to come out of the shadows and it's more welcoming.
As stated before, as of Tuesday, December 3rd, Kamala Harris has withdrawn from the presidential election. That does not mean her immigration policy is not important, as many of her ideas have laid the basic foundation for other candidates. So, for the people, Kamala Harris is always believed to be a defender of the people's democracy. She was San Francisco's district attorney, California's attorney general, and the second black woman to be elected to the United States Senate. As district attorney, she had a mainly pro-immigration stance. She supported issuing specialized visas to undocumented victims of violent crimes, as well as denouncing proposed federal legislation that would criminalize assisting undocumented immigrants. A discrepancy came in 2011 when she supported a city policy that supported law authorities requiring that they turn over undocumented juvenile immigrants to federal immigration authorities if they are arrested or suspected of committing a crime. So essentially, she was supporting handing over undocumented immigrants to ICE. As Attorney General, she supported, she initiated roundtables which helped lawyers be connected to dreamers, thus they had legal representation in a court of law. As Senator, she supported various legislations that were pro-immigration. The first was the Dunn Act, which prohibited the Homeland Security from constructing or expanding on immigration detention centers. She also backed the Reunite Act, which helps reunite families that have been separated from current foreign policy, immigration policy. The Homeland Security Improvement Act provides an overseer to the Custom and Border Enforcement and ensures accountability and transparency. And the Families Not Faculties Act supports minor aliens coming to the United States without a guardian. So now that we have an idea of her background, we're going to go into a fair and just immigration system. Her and her team expect that they will protect 6 million immigrants from being deported, as well as add up to $445 billion to the U.S. GDP over 10 years, and provide America's 2.1 million dreamers a path to citizenship. Her plan immediately wants to reinstate DACA and expand it, as well as implement DAPA to protect the children and parents from deportation. Under this plan, parents of U.S. citizens will be eligible to apply for deferred action if they pass a background check and have lived in America for a certain amount of years. A unique aspect of her plan is the Dreamers Parole in Place program. Currently, under the Immigration and Nationality Act, immigrants are only considered eligible if they've been paroled or admitted to the U.S. So this plan will ensure that Dreamers are paroled, so that's when they apply for citizenship, they're not barred from it. She also wants to establish a rule asserting Dreamers are not at fault for any lapse in legal status. Right now, they need to have continuous lawful status to apply for a green card. However, there is a tenet that says if they are not at fault for any lapse in their legal status. So since Dreamers came to America as children, Kamala will implement a policy that deems them not as fault as a rule. She also plans to call on the Homeland Security Secretary to grant DACA recipients retroactive work authorization. One of the bars currently to obtaining a legal status is the fact that DACA recipients have accepted unauthorized employment. So by giving them retroactive work authorization, they will no longer be doing non-legal, like legal. Lastly, she wants to do away with the 3 or 10-year bans that Dreamers face if they try to obtain a green card at a U.S. consulate abroad. Harris plans to seek elimination of this ban as waiving it as extreme hardship. She wants to implement a rule where being separated from a close family member is an extreme hardship, thus doing away with the 3 or 10-year ban. So now that we know what her plan has, I want to also discuss what it lacks. Her plan is very vague, and there's no specifics to her plan, as well as there's no outline of costs. If you look at her economic plan, she makes no mention of how she plans to implement any of these policies. Additionally, she has no legislative way of enacting these proposals, so everything will be done through executive action, thus it will only last as long as her presidency. Additionally, she has made oscillating comments in regard to demilitarization. In a debate, she rose her hand to be pro-demilitarization, and then in an interview with Meghan McCain, she said she was for militarizing the border. So then a discrepancy came in her stance. Additionally, in regards to foreign policy, she just says she wants to help South and Central America, but makes no explicit plan or number to help them. Additionally, when I reached out to her regional office, I received a no comment or no response in her regard to asylum process or a possible separation from immigration from the DOJ. Nonetheless, her plan is seen as creative by many, as it leverages power allocated to the executive branch under existing immigration law and enables dreamers who would otherwise be eligible for family or employment-based green cards to actually get them. Now we're going to hear from 2 candidates who are seen as more progressive in their immigration reform.
So Elizabeth Warren's immigration plan is like many of her other plans. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's thorough, and it's progressive. But this final prong of it actually presents some problems, and that's why I'm going to talk about first some of the drawbacks. First, in the vast majority of the policy she proposes, she does not account for cost, she doesn't account for where the money would come from, and then the other issue is the progressivism in these policies. It's quite likely that even under a Democratic supermajority, she could not rally the Congress around them because there are divergences within the party itself, and it's thoroughly unpragmatic in that sense. Nonetheless, her slogan for her immigration policy plan is a fair and welcoming immigration system, and this starts for her with decriminalizing border crossing and focusing enforcement on what she sees as more serious issues like drug and human trafficking. Minor immigration violations such as border crossings represent over 50% of federal criminal court cases, and she sees this, Elizabeth Warren sees this as unnecessary clogging our court system, and she believes that it's important to lessen the load to refocus on different kinds of federal criminal court cases like terrorism, organized crime, hate crime, and financial fraud, which judges are being diverted from to deal with these minor offenses. She wants to separate law enforcement from immigration enforcement. Now this for her means removing immigration enforcement from under the Department of Justice, and she wants to do this by establishing an Article I judicial review and essentially creating a new court system remodeled after the federal court system that wouldn't be subject to the same kinds of political games that could be used by an administration that wants to leverage its Department of Justice in order to harm migrants, which she sees as Donald Trump's administration as complicit in this. She wants to reform detention. This means eliminate all private and for-profit detention centers. She wants to do this through legislation, but she's also made it clear that she'll use all of her executive powers to make this the case. And she also wants to enforce strict standards on already existing facilities. And this is specifically regarding two aspects of them, importantly. One is the healthcare provided in these facilities. And then the second one is the potential use of solitary confinement, which she defines as unacceptable. And so she wants to empower watchdog groups in order to oversee the treatment in these facilities. Her plan is actually quite unique, and also her rhetoric is quite unique given her place ideologically in the Democratic Party. She specifically says, quote, put American workers first. Now we actually heard from Joe Biden's plan earlier and his ideals that he actually favors this kind of inflow of migrant workers to replace labor gaps. But Elizabeth Warren sees that it's important that American workers have the first opportunity, partially because she sees companies that use migrant labor as just using them in order to pay them lower wages and sort of abuse them in some sense. So there's these two conditions for her to really want to allow migrant labor to fill labor gaps. And one is see if American workers can fill those gaps first. Two, if those migrants are going to fill those gaps, then there needs to be strict accountability in terms of their labor standards. She wants to facilitate the immigration process and create what she calls the Office of New Americans, which is a very innovative idea that I haven't seen anywhere else. So she wants to first repeal 3- and 10-year bans that prevent people applying for citizenship who are in the country illegally right now. And she wants to make citizenship applications easier for people who have green cards. Now this Office of New Americans, as she describes it, would be an institution catered towards helping integrate socially, economically, and politically newly arrived immigrants into American society and facilitate community ties. She also wants to bring accountability to immigration enforcement, and this means enforcing the same due process standards that we see every other law enforcement agency held to. This means no warrantless stops, especially deep in the interior of the country, and it essentially, the way she wants to go about this is empowering watchdog organizations to oversee how immigration enforcement, this is non-government watchdogs because the government is obviously the enforcement mechanism. So she wants to empower watchdogs in order to ensure that the abuses that she sees, that she would call the Trump administration as complicit in, are stopped when her administration comes into power. The final major aspect of Elizabeth Warren's immigration policy is actually its foreign policy implications, and it's quite interesting how heavily she leans on this. There's about as much foreign policy in her immigration policy as there is in her actual foreign policy platform, and these two feed off one another and they can't be separated. First, she wants to increase the refugee cap to over 100,000. Now, just for some context, I provide this graph here from the Pew Research Center, and you can see the final year of Obama's presidency right here, 97,000. The rest is the world, but we're just focusing on the US for now. 97,000 resettled refugees in the final year of Obama's presidency, also the highest point in Obama's presidency. And you can see it's fallen off a cliff under Trump. But what's important to realize is that her minimum, because she says over 100,000, she's said numbers as high as 125, 150,000, even higher. The last time we resettled that many refugees in 1 year was when half of Europe was undergoing an incredible political change, and there was a massive outflow of migrants because of the fall of communism and the restructuring of many state organizations. She wants to raise foreign aid to Latin America and the Caribbean to the mark it was at before the Trump administration as part of her plan to help make conditions better in migrant and refugee origin countries. She wants to attack the problems where they begin, rather than just accepting or denying them at the point of entry. Trump requested only $1.1 billion to this region in the most recent fiscal year. And just for context, in Obama's final year, he requested $583 million more. And this request by Trump actually was a request to lower aid to essentially every country in the region for essentially every program that we provide funding through to that region. And another aspect of how Warren wants to target problems in the migrant and refugee origin countries is she wants to target individuals and groups such as criminal organizations that are causing this outflow and making living conditions worse there. So this means, for one, targeting and investigating human trafficking, and it also means targeting financial sanctions against drug kingpins and money launderers. And now we're going to hear from the one candidate who perhaps is the only more progressive candidate, at least surely in some ways, on immigration policy, and that's Julian Castro.
Thank you. So the last candidate that we decided to focus on is Julian Castro, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Obama. He was the first of the Democratic candidates to put out his immigration plan, and he calls it one of lived experience. While it is the most radical of the plans, it also serves as a litmus test for how willing or how progressive the other candidates are willing to go. So he divides his plan into three main categories, the first being reforming our immigration system. So more of the recent topics he wants to focus on is expanding DACA, temporary enforced status, and deferred enforced departure protections. And an interesting thing about this category is it is marked by legislative action from Congress. So for this first point, he intends to pass the Dream and Promise Act, which was introduced into the House by a California Democrat. And what it would do is it would cancel and prohibit any future deportations of people under these programs and provide them a pathway to permanent residency. The next thing he wants to do is eliminate the 4.4 million visa backlog that he sees as contributing to the separation of families. And part of this is through two legislative actions that are already in Congress. The first was actually co-sponsored by former candidate Senator Kamala Harris, and it's the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act, which raises the cap on family-based visas to 15% and eliminates employment-based visas to eliminates the cap on employment-based visas to 7%. And another one of the policies or legislative actions that he wants to see passed is the Reuniting Families Act, which was introduced by another California Democrat, and what it would do is it would reclassify closely related individuals such as partners or stepchildren into immediate relatives. It would eliminate the caps on immigration per country, and it would eliminate bars to reentry. So the Fairness for High-Skilled Immigrants Act that I mentioned is the only bipartisan supported measure. Its passage was blocked in the Senate as of September 2019, but it was introduced in the Senate by Republican Mike Lee of Utah. So the last of this category is that he wants to reverse what he says are the harmful executive orders put into place by Trump, specifically the travel ban, and he also wants to reverse the cuts on refugee admissions. Now, he doesn't provide a number as to how many refugees he wants to let in, but an interesting part of his plan is he wants to consider cases of people suffering from domestic violence, gang violence, trafficking, and climate change. So the second part of his policy is creating a humane border policy that is directly and diametrically opposed to what Trump has done in his tenure. And in the first Democratic debate, he called on every single one of the Democratic candidates to rescind Section 1325 of the INA, which imposes criminal penalties on illegal border crossing. Instead, he wants to make it a civil penalty and wants to end detention in every case except for serious ones. He does not define what those serious cases are, but he says that vulnerable populations such as pregnant women, LGBTQ individuals, and children will not be detained in any case. He also wants to split ICE in half and take away its enforcement powers and distribute it among other agencies, including the Department of Justice. This is sort of a more vague and contradictory part of this plan, as he wants to also conduct an investigation of ICE and the Department of Justice for their complicity in the separating families policy. And this part of the plan in particular has some critics saying that ICE's enforcement will basically have its limbs cut off, and there really is no point of the agency by doing this, which I'll come back to later. And he also wants to create this ideal new immigration court under Article 1, similar to a bankruptcy or tax court. This has found widespread support, including among the ABA and the National Association for Immigration Judges. And sort of the underlining idea here is to prevent the erosion of due process and judicial independence. So the last of his policy is to establish a 21st century Marshall Plan. And what I think is really interesting about this part is he wants to work with all Central American actors to increase governmental transparency in diplomatic relations. And actors don't just mean the government officials, they mean the private sector, they mean not NGOs and even community activists. So he recognizes the U.S.'s track record with dealing with Central American countries, and most of this part of the plan uses words like transparency, open communication, but doesn't define the specific mechanisms or timeline which he wants to implement. But there are some things that he sees happening, such as reconstituting the Central American Minors Program, which will allow parents who have children in the U.S. to apply for resettlement, and to increase funding for anti-violence programs such as the Inter-American Foundation, which all sort of work together to discuss what are the causes of people coming into the U.S., and he sees the biggest one being violence. And so now that we've looked at all of our candidates and all of the history preceding their policies, we created a graph to show you how they all line up. And there is a lot of, because they're all Democrats, there will be overlap. We do see widespread support, and the key green is for pro. We see widespread support for keeping or reinstating DACA, for providing foreign aid to Latin and Central American countries, and to enact family reunification policies. These are some of the biggest and most media-covered topics, and they come up over and over again in the Democratic debates, so it's not surprising to see this widespread support. But you do see in red, we have some candidates against some certain things. Yellow is for hesitation expressed, and blue is for no comment. So Biden and Harris have not made comments on separating immigration from the Department of Justice, that is creating a new independent court. As far as decriminalizing border crossing, Biden is outright against it. He has said that he will militarize the border if necessary, and Harris had also had some oscillating comments about it. In addition, with the whole critique of Castro's taking away enforcement power from ICE, it is not clear if he wants to keep the agency but instead distribute all of its administrative duties throughout other existing organizations. So now that you can see what our candidates think of and how they align, we created a border policy to confront some of these issues.
So our final part of our presentation will be discussing our policy proposals that we came up with. A couple of things first. In our policy proposals, first, we split them up between economic policy proposals and political policy proposals. And second of all, we wanted to create policies that would actually have a legitimate, pragmatic chance of passing U.S. Congress right now. Nothing utopian or anything like that, something that actually has a chance of passing U.S. Congress as it is situated right now. So I'll be talking about the economic policy recommendations. We have 4 in total for the economy. The first is to allocate 50% of annual green cards to a merit-based system that could be modeled off the Australian or Canadian system. This is an idea that President Trump and the Trump administration have backed heavily, have heavily supported this idea. And perhaps criteria for a merit-based immigration system could be criteria such as age, work experience, English fluency, education, or if you have any relationship with a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident. Second, we are increasing the allocation of temporary H-2A and H-2B visas. H-2A refers to visas in the service industry, H-2B refers to agriculture. the U.S. has a severe lack of people who want to do native-born citizens who want to do agricultural work. For example, in 2006, only 2% of the agricultural workers in California were native-born, which by definition means everyone else was foreign-born. Third, we have targeted foreign aid for immigration enforcement and border security for Central American countries. This policy recommendation was also seen in Senator Harris's plan, more or less, but very visibly in Castro, Warren, and Biden. This policy proposal would be split into 2 different parts. The first part would be training for immigration enforcement agencies of these countries, such as what Trump is doing with Mexico and their problem with their southern border with the Central American countries and the refugees that are trying to get into Mexico, so something along those lines. And secondly, providing aid to actually improve the economies of these countries, because the main reason that immigrants are trying to get into the U.S. is to leave the terrible situations in their current homelands and to actually find employment and work here in the United States. And finally is to increase the federal government enforcement of employer sanctions. So basically what IRCA totally failed at doing. Once again, the major reason for that people come to the US is to be able to work and be able to find a job and to find income. But if the US government was to actually enforce the sanctions that it has in law for employers to stop hiring illegal immigrants, this would go a long way in stopping the problem of illegal immigration that we see right now.
So these political policy recommendations are also meant to supplement the economic policy recommendations that he just went over. So our first part is increasing funding for border security. Now that's not what we would traditionally hear in the media about increasing like military presence on the border. This is meant to increase the communication networks on the border. Oftentimes the agents at the border have to resort to communicating through their personal cell phones because the service on the border is horrible and disconnected. So what we would do is expand the communication networks in the cell range along the border and develop technology to reach people crossing and respond accordingly and in a humane manner so that we can provide them adequate resources as they cross the border, because it's a long journey and they've been through a lot. The second part is restructuring executive jurisdiction. Now that has multiple parts to it. So restricting ICE's authority in deportations. Oftentimes, especially in sanctuary cities and states, the police are often at odds with ICE. So what we need to do is streamline the way that we deal with deportations and deal with undocumented immigrants so that we aren't pitting our police and our ICE agents against each other. Second part is making a concrete path to citizenship, which is something we currently don't have through DACA, and passing the DREAM Act would address that fact. Increasing refugee admission is another easy way that we can increase humanity in our immigration process, and increasing the per limits for countries with high demand is another easy way to decrease the backlog that we have. Our third part is restructuring the judicial proceedings. The first part is by treating border crossings as a civil offense. Now the problem with treating them as a civil offense is that there isn't a guaranteed due process. So we do need to come up with a plan in order to assure that all of the immigrants that are coming over have a right to an attorney, have the right to have a jury trial, and are treated in a humane way that isn't guaranteed necessarily through the civil proceedings. And we also need to take immigration courts out of the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice, because it does create a conflict of interest, because it is in the interest of the judges in the immigration courts to follow what the Department of Justice has talked about in their immigration plans. So we need to make it separate so that we can have an independent court of justice with regards to immigration. And of course, the last part is passing the DREAM Act, which has 3 really important points, which is increasing college affordability, making sure everybody who is eligible for DACA is protected, as well as increasing the concrete pathway to citizenship. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we are open to questions.
Job well done. Good job, team. All right, so we're going to go ahead and at least start the conversation and defer to our providers. So if you have questions or comments, anything you'd like to say, and then we'll open it up to everyone else.
Sure. Congratulations. This is, I did not expect this, so kudos to you, to the hard work that you've put into this. And I know from previous conversations that it wasn't really easy to, especially on the candidates analysis side, to get the information that you wanted. So thank you for making it so simple and clear for everyone. So I have a few questions, kind of to look ahead, and it relates to one of the policy recommendations that you have here, but then it also speaks to the failure of that same policy in the past. So we know that the US government did not enforce the penalty on the employers, and you're repeating that as a recommendation. Now, obviously there are reasons for that, so maybe if you can explain to us why that did not work in the beginning, and how are you planning to make it work this time?
Sure. So as we all know, one of the original legs to the three-legged stool in IRCA was to penalize employers who illegally hired immigrants. Within the IRCA legislation, I read every 88-page the entire thing, and it clearly said what exactly the U.S. government can do civilly and criminally to both the employers who are illegally hiring the immigrants and to the immigrants themselves. But it was mainly focused on, the penalties were mainly focused on the employer side. However, due to just the government at the time, the divided government at the time, and like the makeup of Congress, that was one of the reasons why you didn't really see much enforcement at that time, especially in the 80s moving into the 90s. You really didn't see much. There was, yes, it was in law, but the actual implementation of that law was highly flawed. For example, what I said about the E-Verify program, it was originally called the SAVE program, but then it was gradually made into the E-Verify. I would say that one of the major reasons for the fault in the employer verification or the employer sanctions was just the way the law was written. The law was written very vaguely, that allowed many loopholes into granting work authorization when it really shouldn't have been granted work authorization, such as the documents just need to appear legitimate. If they look legitimate, the employer can say, okay, that's fine, I'll take those, and that really doesn't matter. So I would say that would be the main reason for that failing. And the reason why we brought it back was first, these laws are already on the books, so we don't need to make a new law saying that we need to enforce X, Y, and Z, and this is how we're going to enforce it. The law is clearly in IRCA, so if we, especially now with the Trump administration and them actually wanting to halt illegal immigration, this could be one of the ways that, especially now in the current political environment, that this could happen. The laws are already there. We just need to increase the enforcement of such laws.
Josh, is it your sense that, with an increased, more reasonable number of immigrants that can be processed through increasing DACA, however you want to do it, that the government can then hold the employers more accountable, saying, okay, now you do have a larger pool of potential employees that you can draw from, so, now we're going to, cut you less slack? Is that sort of the thought on this? Because I sort of along the lines of what was suggested.
Yes. Along those lines, some of the articles and scholarly sources that I read throughout my research pointed to that, said that if we increase the number of immigrants coming in, that could be one of the ways that we could increase the government sanctions on employers. If there's more people in general, more immigrants and more native-born U.S. workers, that could be a way that we could justify increasing enforcement.
In terms of the political feasibility of it, if you were to enforce the employer sanctions, let's say today in California, what would that look like if you said, so you have 98% foreign-born people working in agriculture, and you say, it's not just they need to appear correct, they need to be correct. What does that, is there going to be a problem in enforcing that if you don't also raise the limits of the number of people that come in?
That was what number 2 was talking about, increasing the H-2B visas, which are temporary agricultural visas. The H-2B visa, just to give a little background, is a visa that can be renewed up to 3 years, so up to a 3-year-long visa. The employer has to renew the visa every 6 months to a year in that sort of sense. And the people or the foreigners who are able to get these visas can keep renewing the visas every year or every 3 years or what you want to do. So that has actually been one of the major ways that California in particular has been getting more agricultural workers. There's been lots of evidence, especially in like the Central Valley of California and like San Fernando Valley, lots of where like the agricultural is in California, that they do not have the necessary manpower to basically harvest all the crops. And that's been a problem actually throughout the entire western seaboard. There's been stories in Washington, stories in Oregon, stories in California about due to the lack of manpower, there's strawberries rotting in the field because there's not enough people to literally pick the strawberries out of the ground. So farmers are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's why we included the H-2B in our recommendation.
So to do employer enforcement,
Yeah.
you also need to have the supplementary
Correct.
visas.
Yeah, the H-2B visa will allow you to be in the country legally, so there would be no need for employer enforcement if you're here legally.
One comment and one question. My comment was just to say kudos. I thought you guys did a really great job of aggregating all the information. You did a really good job of curating it. So what we didn't see, you sifted it all down. That chart you did with the candidates and where they stood on the issues, there's hundreds of hours of research behind that simple chart. That part was really impressive. And then I really liked your analysis where these policy recommendations to me are really mature and thoughtful and feasible. So one is kudos. Two, my question is, we talked about illegal border crossings, right? And so that represents a lot of people who are coming because there's a demand for certain kinds of work, like in agriculture, service, construction. Certain industries are disproportionately represented by people who are undocumented. My question, and I don't know the answer, I'm hoping you could shed light on it. A large percentage of our undocumented population are visa overstays, illegal visa overstays, and I wonder how that fits into the equation of your policy recommendation. Are they part of the merit-based green cards? Would it help to solve that problem? Basically, how do you solve the problem of visa overstays?
Anyone want to tackle that?
Well, I think we can start by taking some of the words from Biden, which is the idea. I mean, you might really have in effect the same people, but just having them go through a legal channel, making sure to take from Warren's plan to make sure these people are treated with dignity, make sure that their employers are applying the same wages and protective standards that American citizens would get, and really bringing these people out of the shadows, I think is really the main point of rechanneling all of this, because we'll need these laborers to pick our strawberries and work in agriculture. As was shown, it just doesn't seem like US-born people want to do these jobs. So I think it's really just, it's painting a new light on this sort of aspect because, and also as of now, it's used as a talking point for politics negatively, often by the Republican Party, that all these people are undocumented, they didn't play by the rules. But if we give them a channel with which they could play by the rules and contribute to us, I think that solves many different problems.
So thank you for asking that question.
Yes.
I do, like if I am to ask you to add something, it would be, you know, a deeper reflection on the visa overstay, rightly because the Trump administration is using the idea of the border as the main source of illegal immigration in the US to stigmatize a certain population. And it's really racialized and, you know, targeting brown people, whereas we know that visa overstays, as you mentioned, is the larger contributor to illegal immigration. I do have a question. So you talked about the DREAM Act not passing in Congress. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you think it didn't pass in Congress before, and how are you going to allow for such measures to pass right now? Like what kind of changes would you do to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The DREAM Act, as the way it is, isn't a super radical policy, but it, obviously politics is in play. You do need bipartisanship in order to pass this, and it's been very one-sided towards the Democratic side. So we do need like more liberal policies being discussed in Congress in order to pass it, because like a lot of the stuff that we talked about in the political policy recommendations is exactly what's found in the DREAM Act. So I think what we really need to do is have more conversation about it, because I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what it is, and it's coming across as something radically liberal, which it really is not. It is trying to paint like a concrete path to citizenship, which we don't have, and it's going along what Maverick said, having a consolidated process and having a measure for people who have overstayed their visa or across the border to have access to a system in which they're coming out of the shadows.
Other questions? Yeah, Harry.
So I think you mentioned we started talking about policy recommendations, and you think all of these are stuff that can get through the United States Congress, am I right?
Or at least have a fighting chance.
Have a fighting chance. So I
Which
guess
at this
maybe
point is
I have a specific question about one of the policy recommendations, which is the decriminalizing border crossings. Yes. And this is, and I'm not a lawyer. My basic research when this was like a big thing in the debate is the criticisms of making it a civil offense would be the fact that, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong, that it would be not harder necessarily, but there would be less inclination for somebody that was given a civil offense for crossing the border to have to show up in court in their civil procedure. Is that right, wrong?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you think it's civil, you're not going to get, housed in jail.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a financial penalty.
Exactly.
The other thing I would say is you could have sort of a sliding scale where maybe if you have, ultimately 3 civil violations over time, that ultimately converts the other to a criminal violation, something where you get a habitual recidivist sort of scenario. Something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's always questions whether even, criminalizing it, it's not prosecuted at this point for the most part.
Exactly.
So, does it even have that sort of disincentive built into it? But I think your thought is probably right.
Yeah, and that answered my question, because honestly, that was my basic research into that topic. And then my other just kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe you want to call it a fun question is, if you were in the United States Senate, what would be the policy recommendations you would want to hold your ground on and not compromise on? Would you compromise on any of these things?
So maybe we'll start here with, we'll start with Matt. We'll just go down the line. Pick one of the policies. Which would be your priority that you think, simply is a requirement of having to get this process started? What do you think, Matt?
Funding for border security.
Funding for, and why is that? Why is that the priority? Or say some of the others?
I think that our border security is weaker now, and as Biden does mention, that's it contributes to the influx of all these illegal crossings. I think we have stronger borders, not necessarily again like through a physical border, that we can really deter these crossings.
Okay, Shwetha.
Mine would be restructuring the executive jurisdiction, because that deals with people crossing the border and overstaying their visas. I think it's really important to make sure all of our law enforcement is on the same page, and ICE and our local police are on different sides of that equation, which isn't efficient at all. So I think it's important to make sure we have a standard path for everyone to follow so that we have a consolidated system.
Josh?
Mine would actually be the first one, which is implementing a merit-based system for many different reasons. First, the Trump administration has shown support for such a system. 2, we already have examples of what a system like this could look like. Look to Australia, look to Canada, look to those 2 countries. And also, the consequences of implementing a merit-based system. Trump has argued over and over again, if you bring in people on merit, bring people into the country based on merit, more likely than not, you'll get people who are higher educated, thereby will earn more money in the United States, will thereby pay more taxes, will thereby, 1, give more money to Social Security and other programs such as that, and 2, not be a drain on public benefits or be a public charge. And there's actually been support in the Senate for this. I believe last year, Senator Orrin Hatch from Utah wrote and sponsored a bill called the I-Squared Act. I think it's called the Immigration and Innovation Act of 2018. What this act meant to do was that the U.S. has a huge STEM shortage of workers right now. I believe it's around 3 million jobs that we don't have people to fill who are native born to fill. That's why we're trying to get more foreign-born people to do this work, and that legislation would help to bring in more highly educated individuals.
Great. Lauren?
I'll take a more difficult one. I would say separating the EOIR from the Department Department of Justice. Like I said, it does have a lot of support from lawyers associations, the National Association for Immigration Judges. The president of that association reported that 40% of immigrants in these hearings did not have an attorney present. And I think this goes into our fundamental values of a country, not just protecting due process, but making sure that the separation of powers are indeed separate. That being said, like not having the Department of Justice's mandates fall onto the burden of these judges, because we see problems with hiring, we see problems with judge retention, and I was looking at a CBO report where they poured $70 million, or asked for $70 million for staffing and administrative costs, while also asking these judges to adjudicate hundreds of cases a year. So
800.
yeah.
Sure.
So I don't think this current model is sustainable for every case to be heard on an equal basis. And while it might not be the most pressing issue, I think it would be a priority.
And actually that exact issue, the separation of immigration courts from the DOJ, was going to be what I would say. But I'll frame it in a slightly different way. I think the idea behind that that's so important is the idea of just making the issue of immigration less political and less politically controlled and less part of the conversation of what a president.
If you can do that, you can become an emperor.
Well, it's just the president and the Department of Justice have such power over the direction of immigration policy because of the Department of Justice, and it really makes the issue less about the humanity of the people who are being considered and more about the priorities of the administration and catering to what they think their voters want. So I think removing that issue as much as one possibly can from the political sphere and just dealing with it in a more purely legal way, I think would be a really important policy.
Jamie, final word.
I would pass the DREAM Act. The majority of Kamala Harris's policy proposals all focus on getting rid of the barriers that stop Dreamers from obtaining citizenship. So if you pass the DREAM Act, you don't have to do any of that.
Great, wonderful. Okay, you guys did a wonderful job. Great job answering the questions. Can we have a little round of applause?